Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today I'm speaking with a good friend of the podcast, Joey DeGarda, and we're talking all reasons why people don't get into the market. This topic is something Joey and I get asked quite frequently, like, hey Jordan, I really want to get into the market, but I don't think I have a big enough deposit, or I can't afford to buy in my local area. So today, Joey and I have bundled these common questions together and address what you may be able to do about each individual one of them.
There are some ways around it, and on top of that, I've just got a couple of other different little tips and tricks that if we are struggling to save a deposit.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Joey. What is going on, guys? This is Jordan DeYoung.
And this is Joey DeGarda.
And we are back at it again, having a little conversation around property. We've got a couple of good topics to rattle off today and have a chat to you. But first and foremost, Joey and I always have a bit of a catch up before we do these podcasts. And I said to him today that let's save it for the actual podcast. So how are you, Joey?
Mate, flat out, actually really busy. It's completely different kind of atmosphere here in Sydney, or particularly with myself personally, than I'm sure you might be experiencing down there in Victoria. How's things over there?
Yeah, it's pretty hectic at the moment. Like, it's kind of, we're all kind of in limbo. Like, how long is this lockdown going to be on for? Everyone's, the streets are eerie. Everyone's wearing masks and everyone's scared to go out. And
is it empty?
Yeah, it's completely empty, mate. It's actually a freak out. But there's certain times like, midday or like afternoon where everyone's out for a walk trying to get out of the house, which is perfectly fine. But when everyone's in a mask, it's a little bit eerie too.
I have to ask the question, toilet paper levels at the supermarket?
They're actually all right. I think everyone's come to the realization that us as a country are not going to run out of toilet paper.
Well, as we're recording this now in mid-August, the ScoMo's just come out saying that he's placed an order for 25 million odd vaccines from Oxford Uni. So there's some promising signs that we might see the end of it.
Is he, so they're planning to manufacture them here or make them here, right? And then he's going to give them to all Australians when it's available. Yeah,
I don't know what the ins and outs are. I just saw that he basically placed an order and it's going to be free for every Aussie to get the vaccine. So, and maybe as soon as late this year.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good.
Well, look, yeah. And as I said to you from the get-go, it's only just going to be like a blip in time. We'll look back like people have looked back on and quote the recession that we had to have, or they quote the GFC and quote this, that, and that. It'll just be another thing that we look back and we quote and say, oh, I remember 2020 from COVID-19. But I know yours and my personal horizons, like it's just going to be as I said, a moment in time, not nothing that it's going to be the be all and end all of our portfolio and our property investing journey.
It's pretty funny though. I don't know about you, but like being a young guy coming out of like strong 30 years of economic growth and like never really having to question my job or my finances or my position or my investing journey or anything like that. Not that I have significantly in this time, but, I always hear the older generation saying, we went through the GFC, we went through, the depression and they talk about it. And although, this is pretty similar, but it's nice to now have some sort of correlation to go, okay, well, that's what that sort of moment in time actually feels like. And I completely understand why they go that sort of rationale in their mindset when we're in a period like this.
Yeah, and it's just, as you said, I think there was that comforting. It's comforting to know that other people have lived through, let's be honest, worse than this. Like we've got technology that's making employment still available to many. We've got stimulus. We've got X, Y, and Z that our forefathers didn't have when they went through previous battles and crises. So I think we're in a much better place now. And as long as we don't have the 2-day ahead blinkers on them, we can think 10, 15, 20 plus years ahead. As I keep saying, it's going to be completely fine in the long run.
Yeah, and I think it gives some good correlation to, a balanced portfolio. I mean, prior to COVID-19, I was very bullish on, just capital growth properties, because when you run the numbers, really over 30 years, capital growth will give you a better outcome financially. Whereas what I've realized during COVID is, yeah, that's all well and good, and the story is true. However, if you can't afford to hold on to those properties in this type of environment, say, your tenant wants to leave or they can't pay their rent, plus you lose your job and now you're paying your own mortgage or your own rent plus your investment property and you're in a bit of a pickle, it really demonstrates how important, number one, a cash buffer is. And number two, you still do need some sort of cash flow.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there, that like it's still probably the premier strategy, I suppose, but there's no better time that has illustrated more clearly your need for a cash buffer. Because conversely, if you were to just go, purely cash flow, without stereotyping and generalizing, generally going to be in potentially areas of lower socioeconomic, areas, I suppose, without wanting to stereotype, and potentially areas where people might be heavily impacted by loss of employment. Whereas if we're investing in those areas that are a little bit more blue chip, a little bit more premium, we're less likely to be affected, and our tenants are probably still going to be working. They're going to be the ones that are being able to be in businesses that are ploughing on through the pandemic. So, yeah, look, cash flow is super, super, super important, but more in terms of ensuring that you've got that right balance between capital growth and cash flow coming through with that cash buffer. I know yourself personally and myself, I don't like to purely invest for cash flow because, I personally believe that capital growth is what's going to see us through, particularly investing at our young age. It's going to see us through in the long run, but there's no clearer indication of why we need cash buffers in our portfolios, particularly if it is quite a capital growth orientated one.
I hate saying that, when you say lower social economic, like it's not that you mean that, like it could be like a regional area that it's like, it's just that generally it's in places where, because what happens with the cash flow, and I promise I'll get on today's topic eventually, but essentially what happens with cash flow is like generally the price of the property doesn't grow as quickly as the rentals do. So generally the properties are located in areas where there hasn't been a lot of growth and the rent has increased it faster. So they've got a stronger rental yield. So it could be a regional area, could be a lower, social economic area, as we're trying to explain. But there's all those different types of scenarios. Anyway, on to today's topic. We're talking about why people don't enter the market. And I think this is a pretty big one. I mean, I've talked to a lot of young guys and I'm starting to talk to guys who haven't even got into the market now. And it's pretty interesting to hear, their perspectives on the market and their thought process around the property market and getting in, and will they be ever able to get in, and salary compared to mortgage repayments and rental costs and living with mum and dad. And I think, we'll touch on all these little things separately today. But, I remember back when I hadn't got into the property market and that's all I wanted to do. It's all I aspired to do is just get onto the ladder, get my first property and hit the ground running. But I think it's hard to break that mindset. Are you in the same sort of scenario there, Joey?
100%. Like going back too many years now, I feel old already. When bought the first property, my biggest thing was parting with the deposit. The biggest hurdle was actually saving the deposit. Then the next biggest thing was actually parting with it. But now fast forward to where I am now, I'm kind of going through that with friends now that have seen themselves in a position where they could potentially buy, but it's more about going, I've worked so hard and it's taking me 10 years out of school or whatever it is to get to this point, to get to this cash position in order to actually have a deposit. Do I really want to part with it? Am I going to part with it? And it's more about that emotional attachment to the money that they work so hard for, which is completely understandable. And I completely get it. But it's very interesting now. Like I've kind of become, I don't know if it's about you, but I've kind of become immune to having the money and then seeing it go for a deposit now after a few purchases.
Well, the way I feel about it now is a little bit different. Like I've done so much research into the economy and into currency and into money and how the whole system works. And, when you go through a period where we are today, where they're literally printing money off the press, it kind of devalues my respect for money in some sort of way. So now, the whole investing journey and investing your money, whether it be property, stocks, whatever it is, whatever you're investing in, makes a whole lot more sense now because you're kind of going against inflation. So, for me, if I've got too much money in my account, I kind of freak out. Like I'm kind of like, I need to buy another property, or I need to invest.
What am I doing? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I need to invest in something else because I know that money is getting inflated away, quite quickly too. It's like 2 or 3% per year. I mean, that's the target. So,
personally, I was only thinking about this yesterday going, okay, what do I do? Like, should I, because I know I probably can't borrow again anytime soon. Should I maybe look at some shares or blah, blah, blah? I was like, nah, you know what? I don't know it intricately enough. And my super's kind of doing that for me at the same time. But I was like, you know what, actually, my money is going to work for me and I've got an offset account. So although it doesn't feel like it's doing much, my interest rates are locked in at high 3s, which is unfortunate. But so at least my money's working for me in that it's reducing the interest at almost 4% rather than having it in a high interest saving account, which is probably what, high 1s, very low 2s. So yeah, it's not to say that I'm the same as you. I want to go, I feel like I should be investing 100% of the time. But I was like, you know what, maybe it's time to sit back and let whatever I have saved up, just build up in the offset and try and offset the loans that are sitting there at, say, 4% interest.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think the offset account play is, the second best thing than actually investing in a property is having additional money. And that's why, with the cash buffers, we always say put them in the offset account, and that way they're there. And what the way I'm thinking at the moment is like, I've always said to myself, I want to keep 6 months of cash buffer on hand. But when I'm above that amount, I kind of like, okay, I should start to do something with the excess cash if I'm not just going to leave it. But I'm in the total mindset. Like I thought about shares, I thought about, different other things I can invest in. But you're so right. Like I've spent so much time and effort in investing and researching into the property market. Why would I go into some other sector that I have absolutely no idea about? So I think that's a really good first one. I think even if we take a step back, the second one would probably be, not being able to save as much, like you're kind of getting your paycheck, sort of living week to week, not being able to save enough, and kind of in that position where you're finding it too hard to save for a deposit.
Yeah, look, that's super, super hard. And I mean, I've personally done a podcast on as well. I think you have too, about ways that you can try and squirrel away extra cash. I mean, I know a lot of people personally, like close friends of mine, that are starting to go, well, maybe let's move in back with mum and dad. We've explored 3-4 years living with partners or with mates, and let's go back and move in with mum and dad to save a little bit of extra cash. I only was speaking to a friend of mine on the weekend, and I was asking about X, Y, and Z friend, and they've gone, oh, move back home, move back home, move back home, and move back home. So I don't know, maybe it's getting out there amongst our generation that, okay, we had our time in the sun, let's move back in and suck our pride up and start saving as much cash as possible. Because I mean, like rent here anyway, it's if you're living in a half decent place, even just an apartment, you're spending $250-$300 a week. And if people are making, say, $1,000, it's a huge chunk just gone straight away. Even if you're earning $1,500 a week, it's still a large proportion. Once you're living out, you got all these other expenses and utilities, outgoings, groceries, blah, blah, blah. And then you've obviously got your social life on top of that. So there's plenty of expenses that need to be reined back if we are struggling to save that deposit.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest gripes is people who, people in strong incomes come and say to me, oh, I can't save. I can't afford to get in. I don't have enough deposit, and I'm struggling to put that money away every week or month or whenever you get paid. And I think, it really comes down to about what you spend, what your expenses are. And Joey just touched on that perfectly. But, I know people on 40 grand a year who have bought a property, and it all comes down to how fast you can save. And if the market's moving quicker than you can save, then you need to find a way to get in, because you can leverage yourself ahead that way. So I think, if you focus on your expenses and really hone in, as Joey said, if moving back in with mum and dad isn't an option, find something else. Maybe it's a share house. Maybe it's your grandparents. Maybe it's your sister or brother or siblings or whatever it may be. But find an alternative solution to get those expenses down. And although it can be demotivating at sometimes and maybe not the best solution or not what you want, have the goal in mind that you want to be able to save 10, 20, 30 grand, 40 grand or whatever it may be. And you can do that within a 6 or 12 month time frame if you make these sacrifices, and just know in the back of their head that after that time period, you can actually move into your own place or rent out a place, but have an investment property and have that freedom and acknowledgement and thank yourself for what you've gone through for the last 6 or 12 months to put yourself in that position there.
Yeah, I think you're dead right in that, saying that, like, you know someone that personally bought a property at 40 when they were earning 40 grand. I think when I first bought mine, I was probably on 40 or 45,000 bucks as well. So it just comes down to how badly you want it and how badly you can save. And as you said, yeah, you can just think outside the box of ways that you could squirrel away some money, take up extra side hustles. And now we see ourselves in the position that I was fortunate enough to be in back in 2014 or 2015, where 5% deposits were kind of the norm. I was able to get in with a 5% deposit, and I wasn't earning much, 40 or 45K a year, and I was able to save enough just to get that deposit over the line. And we now see ourselves in that position, which is an option for those who are potentially stumbling across this barrier of saving the deposit. There's the FHLDS positions that are available, and you can get in with as little as 5% deposit, and you don't need to pay LMI. So there are some ways around it. And on top of that, I've just got a couple of other different little tips and tricks that if we are struggling to save a deposit, we might be fortunate enough that we have access to a parental guarantee, another option there, or even, again, those fortunate enough to potentially have access to a parental gift, whether or not that's a loan that you need to pay back or not. But some people have access to parental gifts. And then there's also another option of just co-borrowing, whether you've got a partner or a brother or a sister. You can co-borrow, and therefore you can contribute your cash savings together to get you over that line. And there's just a couple of little tips and strategies to overcome that savings deposit hurdle.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, just be mindful of who you do go and co with, if you are going to go and co with. Like if you're doing a brother and sister or a sibling joint, that's generally okay. But just be wary if you're doing it with a partner that, you're not married with, or you're only been with for a little while. Just make sure that, you are fully committed. And obviously you never know what's going to happen in the future, but it can get a little bit messy down the line if you're trying to, separate and split the property or whatever it may be. But yeah, just try and align both views there, I guess, is all I'm trying to say. Joey's spot on. I'm just giving you a little caveat there for it. The next thing I think is pretty common that I hear is like, well, my friends don't own a property, or, no one in my social group talks about property or wants to get into property. So why do I need to get one anyway? Is that something you hear quite often, Joey?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you're not privy to it, or you don't know anything about, like you don't know what you don't know. And if it's not being spoken about, it's not in your family, like your parents just have bought that home and that's all that they ever really bought. So they never really had any property investment knowledge to pass down. You can't be blamed for that. But the fact that you're listening to this podcast makes me think that potentially you are a little bit inclined to go out there and maybe start a property investment journey. So, I mean, we're fortunate enough now that we've got access to, I dare say, too much information. Whether it be coming from someone who knows what they're talking about or not, someone experienced, someone not experienced, someone who's gone through it or hasn't. But there's access to a wealth of information that people just publish out there for free, like the work that you do, Jordan, and this podcast that people are listening to right now as well. So there's a lot of access to information. But yeah, you can't hold people... you can't criticize them for not knowing about it if it's really not part of their vocab and not part of their social circles. But it doesn't mean that it's not something that they should seriously be looking into.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And yeah, I think you're spot on with the people that are listening to this podcast are probably generally the people that do want to get in. And I think, apart from my dad being a real estate agent, if it wasn't for the books and the podcasts and, being in the social groups with Joey and everything else, I wouldn't be as motivated and as hungry to be as passionate as I am about the property market. So you're definitely taking the right steps and going through the right processes. It's all about getting in that mindset and surrounding yourself with the right people. As always, Joey and I are always up for a conversation with anyone. I really take the time with any listener that reaches out. So if you do want to reach out, please feel free to do so. Love to have a chat to you, and just even if you want to come on the podcast and have a chat to, I'd love it too. But yeah, nice. I think, it'd be awesome. So yeah, I think that's pretty much from me. Joey, have you got any other points there?
Yeah, look, I think we've kind of touched on a little bit, but like another big stumbling block is when people just don't know what to buy. So they know that they want to buy. They don't know the initial strategy. Is it going to be an owner occupier? Is it going to be an investment for us? And then not knowing, obviously you kind of really need to determine that first before jumping into a property, but then not really knowing what they are looking for in terms of what the property should look like, what budgets am I working with. So then they kind of go, you know what, this is just kind of a little bit too hard altogether. I'm much prefer to sit back, have the money sitting in my savings account earning 1% interest. So yeah, not knowing what to buy. I don't know. Do you kind of see that in your kind of circles of people who are just maybe looking to take that first step?
100%. It's always the first question I get asked, and I always go back to them and say, get your finance sorted first. But, you know, it's always the first question is like, what do I buy? What should I avoid? Which is a better question to ask, really. But yeah, there's so much uncertainty. And I think, you know, the trap a lot of other people fall into is analysis paralysis, where, you know, and I'll put my hand up for it. And that's why I use Joey as my buyer's agent for the last purchase. But my first two purchases took me 6 months to, you know, finally get the property that I wanted to buy, because I was just overanalyzing everything, and I had too much. It's not that I had too much knowledge, but I had too many boxes to tick, I guess. And it was just so hard to really find, you know, the perfect property.
How overwhelming is it?
Yeah, it's so, and you know, you can find something that ticks 95% of the boxes, but then there might be one little thing and you're like, nah, it's not going to work. But I just, you know, you got to really, it's all well and good to have 100 boxes to tick. However, you know, some of those boxes are going to have a much higher priority than the others. You find the same, Joey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like if it's, whether it needs to have a certain sized window, like, I mean, like that's not as important as it having parking. So like a lot of people are going, oh, there's just not as much light in this room as I would like, but they're going, I don't care whether it has parking or not. Well, that's kind of a big deal, particularly here in Sydney, whether or not your spot's got parking or if it doesn't, compared to how big a window you've got in your second bedroom.
You're so spot on. Like I hear stories of people, you know, I actually have like friends send me properties and they're like, oh, look at this north facing aspect backyard. There's going to be really good natural sunlight. And then I go, mate, it's an off-the-plan apartment. Like, you know, like it's just like there are so many things to look out for and boxes to tick. But yeah, I think sticking to those fundamentals that we talk about all the time is more crucial than ticking all of those boxes, really.
Absolutely. And just lastly as well, it's kind of, it could be another reason why people are stuck from entering the market. They could have that pessimistic person in their life. I don't know whether it's that uncle that thinks he knows everything at a barbecue, or whether it's a current affair articles or a news.com article about the property market falling off a cliff in September, which is only 2 weeks away, and I haven't seen that cliff yet. But there's just little things like that people go, well, I'm not going to enter the market. There's too much uncertainty and instability behind it, and then end up sitting on the sidelines. And let's say that people have done that back when there was a recession 20 odd years ago, more 30 odd years ago, and didn't make that leap into the market. And they could have bought that property across the road for 100 grand that's now worth 2 million, but they sat on the sideline because they were uncertain about what's going to happen with the market. Like surely they're looking back at themselves 30 years on going, why did I not? Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like, you know, you're setting yourself up for the future. And I think another one that I probably want to bring up is being too scared to get it, like what's happening with the property. Like, oh, I'm waiting for the market to crash. I'm waiting for the bubble to burst to get in. And I think that sort of ties in pretty well as well. Like, you know, if you've got family members talking about this, you know, financial cliff, or, you know, the economy is going to blow up or whatever, you know, we go through times like this. We've been through times like this, although we haven't seen it for a long time here. And there's so much uncertainty out there at the moment. Like if you look at consumer sentiment, you know, it's continuously dropping, and that's, you know, it's going to happen when we're going through uncertain times. We're going through uncertain times. But, you know, I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with Chris Gray, and his whole perspective on it is, you know, at the end of the day, you're buying a spreadsheet. Like you're buying the numbers of the property. That's what an investment property is. And, you know, essentially you go through these boom and bust cycles, and there's always going to be, property bears coming out in this part of time and sort of spruiking the property bubble that's bursting. And although we have seen it in other countries and other locations around the world, we are going through a pretty strong government stimulus package time where we're seeing, the banks come out and giving lending holidays. And it's not just that September cliff. These have all been extended now and continuously being extended. We've seen the outbreak in Melbourne and the response from the government in that. It's not like, it's going to all just burst all in one time. It's actually, the government are doing what they can to support and prop up the market. And that's a good sign to see. But I think, Joey, you're spot on there. And this is what we always say, it's a 30-year play. It's not really, what if the market drops tomorrow? That's great. Like I bought a property at the start of the pandemic and I said to myself, I don't care if the market drops 20% because I'm not selling this thing for another 30 years. It's not about the 2 or 5 years away. It's the long-term play.
Absolutely. And you couldn't have said it any better yourself there. So hopefully the listeners can realize how unscripted this podcast was. So that we jumped back and forth here, there and everywhere. But hopefully people kind of enjoyed that, freestyle approach to what I'm seeing personally with my close friends and family. And I'm sure what you're seeing as well, as to barriers as to why people aren't entering the market. And I'm sure listeners can think of another probably 10 reasons why they haven't made that first step. So I just wanted to kind of, wrap up by saying that if anyone does have any questions about it or does have any additional hurdles that they'd like to speak through, feel free to reach out to Jordan and myself at any time. As Jordan said, we're more than happy to have a chat to anyone about it. If someone wants to jump on the podcast and have a chat about their journey, then that'd be wonderful too. But if people ultimately need guidance, then absolutely feel free to reach out to either of us.
100%. And if you're not worried, if you're worried about coming on the podcast or you're not confident or anything like that, like we're more than happy to take questions and we do a frequent Q&A. Well, we've only done one, but we're planning to do a couple of others. I've got a couple of questions that have come through. So if you just want to write it in and we can talk about it on the podcast, we're happy to do that too. So plenty of ways to get in contact with us. My email is hi@jordandeyong.com. Joey's is joey@estroproperty.com.au. Or just
just .com.
Oh, I always get that wrong.
That's all right.
Anyway, so thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate it, as always. If you do enjoy these conversations, and as Joey said, we're going on more sort of freestyle conversations. We do have a plan, but we like having that more conversational aspect to it. But please drop us a like or a subscribe and a review if you enjoy these kind of conversations. As always, I love catching up with Joey. He's an absolute legend and so many of you have reached out saying you get so much out of our conversations. So I'm pretty keen to keep these conversations going. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey, learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to jordandeyong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan De Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.